A special city council meeting. Today it's May 1st, May Day, at 4 o'clock. And so would you call the roll, please? Kathy?
Mayor Troutman,
Here.
Councilmember Smith. Here. Extra, excused or late. Schumacher. Here. Gill.
Here.
Weed.
Here.
Hawkes.
Here.
Councilmember Meisner.
Aye.
We have
Here.
quorum.
Okay. Well, we're here to discuss the Southern Peaks. And I'm wondering if we could have the chief come up first. And would like to start in this order with the chief and someone from the Department of Human Services. And then we'll kind of go from there. Chief, I do have a list of, well, I think all the council people have a list of the numbers of calls and requests for calls. I'm assuming we got that from you, and would you like to go ahead and start with your discussion on that, or?
Yes, I'll just go through the data that I provided.
Need you a little closer to the mic,
A little closer?
or you can shout.
Okay. I'll just go through the list of
Okay.
the information I provided. And for 2016, and I'm going to break this up into two different types of data. One is just call for service, which is a standard police call for service. But then we also have a contract with Southern Peaks for extra duty assignments, where they contract through the police department to have a car dedicated to their facility. And this is paid by Southern Peaks and is reimbursed to the city. So that's an extra duty assignment. So in all of 2016, we expended 163 hours in standard calls for service. And those total numbers for 2016 was 220 calls for service. For the extra duty or special detail assignments, we expended 1,165 hours, and those were compensated hours, and those officers handled 291 calls for service. There was some additional information that I did not get to council, and that's our most current information that I have, and that's from November 1st to May 1st today of 2017. And we have had a total number of 116 calls for service at the facility, and of those, 72 were runaways.
Your stockbroker? No,
Another officer.
this isn't humor, sorry.
No. So that's the information I provided, and I can answer any questions about how that information was tabulated.
Define a runaway. They call you, you find them, how do you define that?
Yes, it's, I believe that the facilities call them AWOLs. We call them runaways because it's a term that we've used for years. Once a youth leaves the facility, then our preference is that they call us immediately. And this is a procedure that we developed under former Chief Schultz, and we found it worked to be very beneficial for us because of the time element. Originally, we would not get a call until staff lost sight of the youth, and then we would go out and then we would have to find them. And we expended a lot more time doing that than when we got the call early, because our standard response time would be an average of maybe 5 minutes or so, depending on, where an officer responded from. And we actually recovered the youth much quicker. So our preference is that we get a call as soon as they leave the facility.
So that's defined by our department and not by Southern Peaks?
Correct.
Okay.
You keep track of the ages of the runaways or the ages of those who've had warrants or assaults and harassments?
Do we keep track of that information?
Whether they're minors or 18 or older.
That information's available, but it's not something that I normally track.
And to what level was the sexual assault? Was that a rape, or is that a different level of sexual assault?
It can vary. Under the NIBRS, when we categorize that, it just gets a broad category to begin with.
What about the child abuse? Is that child abuse from an adult or a staff worker? Or?
Without having the case file in front of me, I can't tell you what the difference is. 99% of them that we go on, I do know from historical data, are youth on youth.
And you actually enter into the facility?
Yes.
Okay.
With regards to the extra duty assignment, is that a officer or a vehicle that is at the facility all times, or is that an officer or someone that can be called
No,
at a specific thing?
they have to physically be on the facility grounds, usually in the front parking lot.
Okay, so we have a vehicle there at the front parking lot, but yet we still have runaways?
Yes.
Any questions? Chief?
When you pick up youth, what do you do with them? Do they go to Pueblo or back to Southern Peaks?
It depends on a number of things, but it depends on if they are under the, if they're there because of a commitment by Division of Youth Services, then sometimes they will go to a secure holding facility, which would generally be PYC. But most of the time, they're returned to the facility.
Or they could theoretically just turn around and walk out again?
Yes.
Okay.
Isn't it fenced? Is the facility fenced?
It has a partial fence, but it's a treatment facility. It is not a detention facility.
Oh, okay.
It's fenced but not gated.
Now, does your agency have what we would call meetings with Southern Peaks staff on a weekly basis, monthly basis, or is there such a thing, such a protocol?
Yes, we do have meetings, but they're not regularly scheduled meetings. It's if we have a topic of interest to discuss or an issue, then I'll make the call and we'll get together.
Okay. Mr. Meisner, you have a puzzled look.
I have a question, but I don't think the chief can answer.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Chief Cooper. No, wait. I'm sorry, Mr. Gill.
From an enforcement side, what better way do you feel that we could keep these guys where they belong? From an enforcement side, I mean, you've obviously been in touch with the people and you know how their system works and this and that. What would be a better way, or a way to make this go away, make it stop? I mean, keep them in the house.
I'm open for any suggestions.
Okay. Just like I said, you're the guys out there dealing with it and you've been doing it for quite some time. And I just wonder if there was something peripheral that you could say that would maybe aid things and stay within the guidelines of what the center is and what it's designed for.
The only thing that I think might mitigate this to a degree, although I don't think there's any way we can completely eliminate the issue, is to have staff, my staff there more frequently. But the reality is that we recover most of these kids fairly quickly and get them back to the facility. We do have a rare occasion when we have one that does escape from us and we lose sight of them, and then it may be several days or I think maybe even a couple of weeks before the youth is recovered. But again, those are rare occasions.
Okay. Thank you.
I got a question.
Mr.
Just
Meisner?
because he mentioned it. You just mentioned losing sight. So if they notify you of a runaway, walk away, whatever it is, does the police department staff that's on site remain on site and somebody else responds?
No. When we're there, our function is to, if there is a runaway or an AWOL, is to go collect that youth and return them to the facility. I have worked that duty occasionally, and generally the way it works is because of the fencing, they generally try to walk through that front gate, and the officer's presence alone most of the time curtails them trying to leave. We don't operate under the same guidelines. We are allowed to use reasonable force to detain, whereas their staff does not have that.
Is that on grounds or as soon as they have to step off grounds
They have to be off grounds.
before you can physically restrain?
Well, unless there's something actively going on inside the
Right,
facility.
How long has a person been AWOL? What's the longest period of time?
That question might better be answered by their staff. When we take an initial report, if they're not collected immediately, then we do enter them in as a runaway. And a lot of times when the youth is recovered, I'm not personally notified of that.
Okay. Further questions? I might add that we have, thank you, Chief Cooper, thank you. We have people from, we have the district attorney here, Molly Chilson. We have representatives from the Department of Human Services. We have some staff members and people from Southern Peaks, and we have some citizens. I think I've covered them all. So I wonder if next we could talk to someone from the Department of Human Services. Steve? We could, we'd like to have your name at least. I'll give it back.
Steve Clifton, I'm the Director of Fremont County Department of Human Services, and been involved with the project since its inception. The issues have always ebbed and flowed around for our department, restraints and runaways. Now, and Brandon can give you the numbers, but we've been looking at those for probably 8 or 10 years, and they've been, since Brandon's been here, they've been going down, but I'll let them explain that part. Our major role as the county department, after it was opened and licensed by the state, is to respond to any institutional abuse. If there's a child on child, we go out and investigate those. If it's staff on a child allegation, we do those. When we sit in an advisory capacity on the committee that Southern Peaks has out there, which many of you also sit on. So our role at this point is to respond to any of those complaints. And the facility itself is licensed by the state of Colorado. There are rules and regulations. And I think one of them was alluded to is as far as using physical force with kids. Brandon can expound on that, but there's an issue that you cannot do anything to those kids in a physical nature, other than if you're in the buildings or on grounds. But the restraints or bringing kids back physically is a problem under the regulations. So our role is basically to take a look at those, to respond to any directives we get from the licensure people as far as placing kids there, whether we can place kids or not. And I haven't seen anything, and I'll have to ask Stacy, have we gotten anything as far as being able to not place kids there or place kids there? We haven't gotten anything from licensure as long as I can remember. Or some people say I can't remember beyond yesterday, but anyway, that's kind of our role as a local agency. And as far as some of the specific licensure things, either Brandon would have to respond to, or we'd have to call some of the state licensing people. We don't really get into that, other than what we need to do as far as child welfare and child protection of kids there.
So your if you could call it supervision, is if some event occurs within the facility?
Yes.
Correct. Other than that, you don't cover their state license or inspections, or you don't do any inspections or anything like that? So you are aware of the runaways, walkaways, that kind of stuff?
I've looked at those in terms of how many they are every month, and as far as I know, they're in single digits, I thought, but I don't know. Brandon would have to respond to that, but they're significantly less than they were when the facility opened. And I think part of the due diligence out there, they were able to put in a fence, which was something that happened later on, and they'll have to explain how they supervise the kids. I don't want to tell you how they operate, but those kids do have supervision when they're on grounds and during various activities. Can kids get away? Can kids escape? You bet. They have. I mean, that can't be denied. I think part of the payment to the city police department was for some of that protection or some of those calls, because that was an issue several years ago, and I think they agreed to collectively to do that to offset some of those costs. But I don't know if it's representative or not. I think part of this discussion, and that's why I'm here today, is really to more to listen, because I don't have a whole lot of information, and when you don't have much information, you could be dangerous. But anyway, I think we're here to be concerned about kids, and if there's some things that we need to be aware of, that we will, under the child welfare issues, that we want to make sure we're aware of that too, and work with the facility. Because on the child protection, child welfare calls that we do and cases that we work on, we do staff those after every investigation with the facility and with the state.
Okay. Any questions of council? Mr. Gill?
In your works, are you familiar with any of these other centers within the state, and perhaps maybe what kind of number they run? Right now, with the numbers that they gave us, like 19.6 each week on runaways since November. Do you know if that's high or low statewide, or if anybody else is having the same problem that we're having?
I haven't gotten any of those numbers lately or talked to any of those facilities.
Okay.
But runaway isn't uncommon with facilities. When you're dealing with adolescents that are troubled, when they get under frustration, that's one of the first things they want to do.
Run, yeah.
Whether they're at their own home or whether they're wherever they are, is flight. Period.
Right.
Doesn't make sense, isn't rational, but that's what adolescents do. Usually, not all of them, but many. And so that isn't uncommon.
I just kind of wondered where the facility here stood on the big picture.
Yeah.
And maybe what other facilities were doing to try to counteract this and keep the guys where they belong.
The only one I'm familiar with is El Pueblo, and theirs seems to be higher than ours, but I don't know about how many, I'm not sure exactly how many kids they have, because it does fluctuate. I do know that one thing we had talked about years ago was, what do we really need to refer to law enforcement, what don't we? And I think the chief, as far as I understood, and Stacy can correct me if I'm wrong, wanted us to refer anything that comes before us, he wanted to be referred to him also. And we, before that, had done a different screening process, so there might be some things we could do there.
Right.
That may relieve some of that. But I think that's just something you have with all kids. We have that with kids. We have that with kids that we're working with, the families. And so it's the cost of doing business with adolescents. Right. Really, I mean, it happens.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Meisner, did you have your hand up, or?
No, I was trying to make sure that Mark was acknowledged.
Oh, you were helping Mark. Okay. Anyone else for Mr. Clifton? Okay, thank you, Steve.
Thanks.
We have the district attorney, Molly Chilson. Would you care to talk to us, or? This is our district attorney, Molly Chilson. Welcome.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I am not sure if you all are just inquiring of my perspective on Southern Peaks and its impact on your community, or if I could answer direct questions. I could do either one.
Let's start with the first.
Okay.
So
I started working with the issues that arise from this residential treatment center for youth in this community in 2004. And I was both the elected and the juvenile prosecutor assigned to the Canyon City Fremont County juvenile caseload, 2004 through 2009-ish. And then at that time, the facility was fairly new. I would rely on Ms. Billington to tell us exactly when it was built. When did it open? 2004, so it was pretty new. And it was a new experience, I think, for the Canyon City community and the Fremont County community, both at just an individual citizen level as well as a law enforcement level. Holy cow, what's happening? We have kids who are running away from this facility. We have kids in this facility who are both DHS referred youth, meaning they themselves are not in any trouble. They're there because their families have been found to have abused and neglected them and been incapable of caring for them. So there are little guys in there who are there not because they're juvenile delinquents and have committed any delinquent acts. And then you have kids there who are DYC committed, right? They're there because they had juvenile delinquency matters that became so severe that they were committed to the Department of Youth Corrections and placed there as a part of a sentence. So you have just so much going on within the facility, and there's abuse, child-on-child abuse within the facility. There's child-on-staff abuse in the facility. So how we deal with this at a law enforcement level and as a community has been a struggle that we've been negotiating since the facility opened. In terms of the impact that I see on our law enforcement community, I think the Canyon City Police Department has worked very well with Southern Peaks. That's my impression. Ever since 2004, I think there was a lot of frustration on the front end. The sheriff's office also, who has to transport these youth, let's say a child commits an offense within the facility and then goes in to PYC, right, the detention facility, and then I prosecute that kid. Well, the sheriff's office has to transport that kid back and forth from PYC to court every time we have a court appearance. So the effects are not just within the municipality, they're also countywide. And then obviously our office having a greater number of juvenile delinquency cases to handle because some of these assaults, especially on staff, need to be prosecuted. It is something that we manage, as Mr. Clifton said. It is something that's not unexpected. It is not remarkable to Southern Peaks. It happens at other residential treatment facilities. And there is value, I think, that the Department of Human Services would speak to of having this facility in this community so that with our own youth who, because of their family situation or because they have been DYC committed, if there is a local option available to them where their parents or their existing family members can come and do treatment with them, that's pretty positive, rather than having them in Denver, for example. So there are ups and downs and positives and negatives. What we also face is that some of these youth are tribal kids from out of state, right? And so they may commit an offense or run away or do something in this community. And then before they can be prosecuted or dealt with for whatever they did, their tribe or their county Department of Human Services from out of state takes them home. And on the one hand, we might say, well, they should stand and have to resolve that matter, especially if it's a juvenile delinquency matter, here in Fremont County before they're taken home. And then you also might consider, well, if there's not a great deal of property damage, there's not a great deal of restitution owed to someone or someone who's been seriously hurt, why the heck do we want to keep them here and continue transporting them back and forth and hold them in Colorado? So those are some of the issues we face. Now, if I can answer any specific questions, I'd be happy to do so.
Okay. Questions of council? Mr. Gill?
In the world that you know better than we do, is it a good idea to have people that are placed in there because of a lack of a home, along with people who have been, I don't know what the word is, but remanded to this center for violations of general public law? Is it a good idea to have them all sheltered in the same place?
You know, I'll give you my personal take, and that's all it is.
Okay.
And I'll say that this is very complex. It's extremely complex for legislators. It's extremely complex from a fiscal standpoint.
Right.
So just because, I'll give you my dream, right? Because when this facility first came into our community, I didn't have a lot of hands-on experience with residential treatment facilities and the fact that DYC youth were placed with DHS youth. I also didn't have a lot of experience with the idea that you could have kids who are 17 and you could have kids who are 13 and they have access to each other, and it makes it the chances that, like, for example, a sex offending child can also be in this facility, as well as children who have experienced that kind of sexual violence and victimization. I didn't like any of that. I really didn't. And I was very concerned about it, and I had to do a little bit of education of myself, and I continue to be frustrated with the systems we live in. And it is frustrating, but you have to consider, well, are other options available, and why is it the way that it is? And when you study the juvenile law, as well as the financial realities and the rules for DHS at a state level, in terms of every child, whether they're a juvenile delinquent child or a DHS-placed child, we're to be guided by the best interest of that child. And at no point, unless we direct file, like we treat a kid as an adult in a criminal proceeding, unless we're doing that, we have no choice but to treat them as kids, no matter whether they're offending kids or victim kids. And so, while in my opinion, in a perfect world, we wouldn't mix these youth, we don't live in a perfect world, and the way it's set up, these youth are mixed all over the state of Colorado. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Arquez?
Yeah, since you've been involved, with the system since it came in and with the DA's office, have the number of cases involvement that your office has been involved with, has it decreased since they first started to up to now, as far as your knowledge goes?
We talked a lot, and we continue to talk. I think the last meeting that I was involved with the police department and Southern Peaks was in October of 2016. So our former chief was still here, and we revisited some of the dialogue that we've had for years, which is, do we need to see every instance of harassment? Does an officer need to investigate it, number one, right? And that's for law enforcement to decide, what they feel they need to be called on. And then what needs to be referred to the DA's office. So I, personally, every shove between 14-year-olds, a juvenile delinquency case does not make. There's no point. And what I've discussed with both Southern Peaks and law enforcement is that these kids are already placed out of home. What is the worst sentence that I could accomplish in the juvenile delinquency system? Placing these kids out of home. So I have some limitations on what I'll accept for prosecution out of Southern Peaks. And I think that may drive the number of cases that are referred to me by law enforcement. I believe that there's some discretion being used by officers before they send a case to our office for potential filing of a petition. So I can't say whether it is decreased or not. I think that Deputy Chief Cooper's numbers are probably more reflective of that. If we compare those to 2003 or 2004, they would be more reflective. But what I would say is that from an administration standpoint, I feel as though there's good transparency between the Southern Peaks and law enforcement. And among the cases that I get from law enforcement, there's been no dramatic change in the kinds of offenses that we see or the numbers.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Thank you, Ms. Chilson.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And we have members of the public. Would someone like to talk or listen or make any comments? Would you have your name, please?
My name is Rick Shepard, and I live on 4 Mile Lane. I own several of the businesses in the Western Meadows subdivision by Chili's and the self-storage facility there at 4 Mile Lane and Highway 50. And I spoke at the council meeting several weeks ago, and just maybe to reiterate our concerns, our safety and welfare of not only our homes and our barns, but our children and our grandchildren who are playing in the yards when the kids pass by our homes. And I think it was it 3 weeks ago we had the grass fire on the bluff across the street from my house, and that morning there was 2 of the kids seen headed that direction up the hill. And those are the concerns that we have, I have as a neighbor, business owner, all that. I was a little taken back about the number of calls and how many of them were runaways. I left my pad, but was it 116 calls and 72 were runaways? Whoa, that's alarming for me when I live there and my doors are unlocked or my grandkids are in the yard playing, and we've got that many calls about walkaways. So I get more concerned the more I hear. So I'm hoping we can do something here. We also brought suggestions to that meeting. Could we get a reverse 911 call? Could we get notification when there is a child out? You know, there was lots of suggestions in the neighborhood about ankle bracelets and stuff that I don't know is realistic, but we'd like to know when there's somebody out so we can prepare our children and our unlocked vehicles and our horses that are in the pasture that somebody might want to go on a ride. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what extreme it'll get to, but we do have concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Shepherd. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am? Would you please approach the mic? We need your name and address, please.
I'm Emily Cornella. I live on Chaparral Road also.
Your first name is?
Emily.
Emily.
So I just have a couple of questions. We were talking about notification, so maybe this will be better after Southern Peaks talks for us to ask questions. Because one of my big concerns was when the 11-year-old was out that, you know, that nobody in the community was notified. So I've never heard anyone in the community say, oh, there's a child missing, anybody looking for them. Because if my child was missing, it would be a huge deal. I'd be at the news saying my child is gone. So it's a concern to me what's happening there. So I don't know if they can answer right now. Another question I have, if they're allowed to come and, I know they're not allowed to come and go, but if they're allowed to walk away, you can't detain them, then why are the police allowed to detain them immediately after they leave the facility? I don't understand that. If they're not forced to stay there, then how come they're allowed to pick them up and bring them back if they're allowed to just leave? I mean, I know they're in violation of, I guess, their treatment or wherever they're supposed to be. So I kind of don't understand that. And if the police are, if it makes such a difference when your officer is on premise, then when do you choose when they're there? How often are they there? You said 1,100 hours. I don't know how many hours are in a year. I mean, how many days a week is there an officer there? Every 7 days a week there's somebody there. So, I mean, 24 hours? So, I mean, and is that something that Southern Peaks could be responsible for paying more time if that really deters them to have an officer there? I mean, is that something maybe we could ask that they would have to have somebody there at all times? So.
Okay, thank you, Emily. All right, we have Mr. Kraus.
J.D. Kraus. I live on 4 Mile Lane also. So this was brought up. I know Emily and you ladies jog up and down, or run up and down 4 Mile Lane. My wife does. Don Lay's daughter-in-law runs up and down 4 Mile Lane. A lot of times they're by themselves. And so my question for Southern Peaks is, you know, do we ever need to be concerned? Do I need to be concerned? Do we need to be concerned for the safety of our wives, of our, you know, daughters and things? I've been encouraging my wife to run with Mace, and she hates it. But I understand, Emily maybe shared last time, that there's been some 18-year-olds that have been out. So I would like to know kind of what is the age, what's the upper age? Is there anybody that's in their 20s? Are there any of these kids that are from a gang in New Mexico? We have heard that. You know, how violent are these kids? And we own Boulder Bands here on Main Street, and we had a young lady. We partnered with Southern Peaks, and I don't know who brought her out, but she actually came and worked for us, and it's something I didn't share last time, and she was wonderful to have. And so I understand that you guys are getting all different kinds of kids. And as a community, I mean, I used to be involved with the youth at our church, so I mean, my heart is for the worst of the worst. So I want to see restoration, and I don't want to be, you know, I don't want to be oppressive to these kids. But at the same time, I've got a 6-year-old girl. I've got a 13-year-old girl, you know, and there was one of these kids that were in my camper. I'm I'm pretty darn sure, and they spent a night or two before I started locking the door, and it was in the shed, my RV, and they left a pair of glasses, and there was a little pile of cereal because we had some cereal boxes in it. That was before I, started locking the door, and so they didn't damage my property. I thought it was a mouse, but it was a very neat mouse. I'd never seen a mouse quite that neat, and so, what we think, because I saw them, the two kids that were, one very little one and one a little bit taller, that were out, which kind of predicated this meeting, the original meeting, the day that the fire happened. The officer came up, and I met him on 4 Mile Lane. To my knowledge, there were no officers, and I'm not, Chief, I'm not, saying anything against your team or anything, but there was nobody going after those kids. I mean, to our knowledge, there were 4 kids that got out, and you all could correct us, but this is what we've pieced together. 2 of them surprised Rick and Judy when he was irrigating his field. 10 o'clock that morning, the police came and detained those kids. And then the 2 that I saw a few hours later, when Judy was going to walk up 4 Mile Lane, and she made a U-turn when she saw some kids crossing the barbed wire, obviously barefoot because they were, navigating like this through the cactus and things. Those kids were out there for 5 or 6 hours before the fire got started. And I haven't heard, did they get charged with starting that fire? Did anybody investigate that? Were they the ones that okay. So, as Rick alluded to, that could have been in our hay barn, and they're kids. I was a kid. I mean, they were probably goofing off playing with matches or whatever. So, but I think that one of those or 2 of those kids were out for 24 hours. Yeah. So, as Rick alluded to, we need to know if these kids are out. I mean, for their safety, for our family's safety. I don't know how we do that, but we've got serious concern. And as a business person that's been involved in real estate, we shared this with the mayor, but if in fact we have some developers that are coming into our community that are going to build some homes up in 4 Mile Ranch, that's a wonderful thing for our community. And we need to do everything that we can to embrace that, because it's been a heck of a long time since we've had some really exciting building and things happening here. And I hope to God that they don't get nervous about this situation and 72 runaways since November, because I would be nervous if I were them. And so I think as a community, we need to tighten this thing up and get a handle on it. So thanks for calling this meeting.
Thank you, JD. Okay. Could we, Ms. Bernath? I'm sorry. Okay. Could we have one? I'm sorry, I saw a hand go up. Would you like, are you a citizen? Could we, just a few minutes, then we'd like to talk to Ms. Bernath? What's your name? I mean, we need your name and address.
My name is Don Lay, and I live at 83 Lariat Lane. The last 2 years before that, I lived 36 years at 4 Mile Lane and Highway 50. When we were living there, we've had several incidents where these runaways have either ended up at my business, which is on that corner, or camping out in our barn. Thank goodness they didn't have matches like the kids did the other day, and if my barn had gone up, that'd be a tremendous loss. Besides that, our children play in the barns and whatnot. It's just a real concern that we don't know when they're out, to echo what Rick said. I think that'd be real helpful for the community. But I'd like to ask a question is, if these children are supposed to be at this place, some of them it sounds like they're reprimanded there by the court to be there. Why aren't they kept there, and why isn't more effort made to make sure that they cannot run away? A complete perimeter fence would seem to me to be the answer, with your own internal security guards. Would make a lot of difference. Can you imagine if you go out to the short-term centers at the prison and there's no guards there and they're just allowed to walk away, what a mess it would be? So I'd just like to ask a question there. excuse me, maybe there's a good reason, and I'm sure you're doing a really good job for these kids, and maybe you're teaching them some self-responsibility by allowing them freedom. But that freedom could really get us in trouble one of these days, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Slay. Terry?
Southern Peaks was approved in 2002 as part of the 4-mile plan, PUD plan. And we had some concerns about this going back in 2015 when they had asked to put up an 8-foot fence around the perimeter of the property. And so I looked into their original approval. And I just wanted to give you some background on this. This was explained to the City Council at the time, and Southern Peaks was described as follows. It is essentially a school campus, including residential dormitories and cafeteria, assessment building, gymnasium, classroom building, administration building, maintenance building, and a playing field courtyard in a quad setting. It was not intended to be fenced. They asked for an 8-foot fence, and that was approved by Adam Lancaster and myself in 2014. They did come back again later when they remodeled, I believe, the girls' dormitory and asked for a 10-foot fence. That prompted some concerns as well about why they needed to have a fence of that magnitude. And we did a little bit of statistics at that time and found that in 2012 there were 87 runaways. 2013 there were 196. 2014 there were 187. I don't know what the count is now, and we certainly haven't done anything in counting since then. They withdrew the application for a 10-foot fence. I do have a question, as was because of some information that we ended up doing a site visit out there, toured the facility, talked to the director, and got quite a bit of information and did not go any further with this. We were concerned that perhaps the approval of a children's home did not quite equate with what is actually out there now. But it was approved, and that definition, and let me give it to you because it's an important part of this. The Canyon City Municipal Code defines a children's home as an institution for the care of large numbers of minor children under the age of 18 in a non-family setting. The home shall have been and must continue to be licensed by the Colorado Department of Human Services. When we went and did the site visit, which was in April of 2015, so that was 2 years ago. I don't know if this statistic still holds true, and I would imagine that Southern Peaks would be able to answer this. My understanding at that time that there was only one local child in that facility. All of the others were from other counties, and 50% were from out of state. So that's just something that we had learned at that time. It doesn't necessarily serve a local population, so. That's the information I wanted to share. If there's anything else.
Mr. Meisner?
Harry, can you shoot those numbers again that you gave with 2012 or something like that?
Runaway number, I think.
87 in 2012, and this came from the police department at that time. I had asked them to do a little compilation for us. So 87 in 2012, 196 in 2013, and 187 in 2014.
And those are runaways or incidents? Contacts?
Runaways. That's what I understood as runaways.
So Terry, you say that in 2002 in the PUD plan, it was approved to be a school campus. What kind of school campus was
it was approved as a children's home. It was described, however, to the council at that time as a school campus with these different facilities in a quad setting. And a quad setting, as we all know, are buildings around a very large courtyard and playing fields, generally. That's the quad setting. It was not intended to be fenced. Obviously, they
How
have.
would you define this facility today? Do you think would be a more accurate definition?
That would be difficult for me to define. I have concerns that it has components that were never thought of at the time. That's what has the planning department more concerned based on the land use. I don't think that perhaps even these folks who actually started this and run it envisioned that there would be so many kids leaving this facility on a daily basis.
So it was approved to have this children's home in a residential neighborhood under that PUD? And
It was.
How is that appropriate or considered appropriate?
Well, back then, that seemed to be a good idea. It's surrounded on 3 sides by residential. Maybe that wasn't the most appropriate place to put it, but it is there now. It's very well established and, and functions as it does function.
How do you see it impacting potential future development in the 4 Mile area?
Well, as you know, there have been complaints from people in the neighborhood. I doubt unless that changes, unless those behaviors of the kids change, that is going to change. I mean, I think that there have been complaints for actually many years out there.
Go ahead, Dennis.
Thank you. Terry, when you were talking with Ashley, you said when you were out there, you had noticed that there was other components there that had not been described in the original application. Specifically, what were you talking about?
Well, when did I say that? Just
a while ago.
No, just the fencing, really. I mean, all of those buildings are still there. They have done a girls' dormitory that's separate. They're also putting in another enhancing and putting. They're changing one of their buildings out to be an additional classroom. That did not require any kind of changes to the PUD or to their approval because they are a use that is allowed within that PUD, and they are, as far as I can tell, they are still complying with that.
Okay. So, I mean, there's nothing really uncharacteristic. I mean, pretty much the elements of what they had described this as being is what is there with the addition
I would
of a big
hesitate
fence.
to go that far. I really do believe that what was described to them is something that we might see as a college campus, for instance. That is, it has now characteristics that don't meet that. A quad setting, a school campus. I mean, it might be that, but it's also now surrounded by an 8-foot fence and has people leaving and coming back. I mean, people leaving who are not authorized to do that.
Yeah.
To your knowledge, because now I'm hearing the definition of a school campus / children's home, but in our report from the police department talking about the ability of the facility to detain children or restrain them from violence, that is a treatment center versus a youth detention facility. How does a treatment center correlate with being a children's home?
Well, those are all definitions that are arrived at by the state. I think that at the time when this was approved, it was a treatment facility can't detain kids. It can't force kids to stay on the campus. And that's the my understanding as a novice here is the difference between between a treatment facility and a detention facility.
The children's home was always intended to be as a treatment facility.
Yeah, I do believe, yes. It wasn't meant to be a detention facility. And it does not function that way either, so.
Meisner?
I realize we're going back on some history, but in those original information, one, you're indicating that we approved it as a children's home?
That's
And
what
then
we
we have-
call it.
Pardon?
That's what we call it in the 4 Mile PUD plan. It's called a children's home.
And then within our ordinance description of a children's home, there's reference to minor children only?
In ours, yes, that's correct.
And would that description relate to this children's home?
It should correlate. I don't actually know what the ages are for the kids who are here.
Do you know that in the original information, was there reference to that, in that application, was there reference to a children's home or was there reference to a treatment facility?
I'd have to go back and double check, but I'm pulling out the things from that. I don't believe it was called a treatment facility. But I'd have to go back and check. I don't know for sure. I wouldn't want to.
I think that information would be valuable because we are now making reference to Southern Peaks Regional Treatment Facility. And if we were making reference to Southern Peaks Children's Home, I think there would be some significance. And I'm not trying to make an opinion one way or another, but it seems like relative to the original authorization and the name of the facility obviously are in conflict with each other.
Well, I think that there are connotations of what a children's home is. I mean, we just conjure up something, and then we have a treatment facility. If I gave you, and which I did, the definition of a children's home, that could easily be a treatment facility.
Terry, did the 10-foot fence around the girls' dorm, was it installed?
No, it wasn't. They withdrew that application.
The fencing that's out there, what type of fencing is it?
I think it's chain link with slats, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. How tall is the fence that they put up?
8.
8 foot, okay.
Terry, do we currently still allow children's homes in residential zone districts, either by right or by special review?
They may be allowed in some districts by special review, but I apologize, I don't have my code here with me. I can definitely look that up and go get that while other people are speaking, if you wish.
And the residential zoning around the facility is R1, I presume?
Well, a lot of that is still in a master planning phase. This is the 4-mile PUD. Some of it is residential. I mean, almost all of it is residential, but I think it's also single family and multifamily.
Okay.
Most of which, as you know, has not been built out.
Yeah.
Mr. Hawkins?
Now that they're there and they're licensed by the state of Colorado, right? Okay, so now the question I have is this. If it comes to be that there's a conflict with what we have for zoning and everything else, even to the point where they first applied for that, what's the procedure with regards to the state? If the state says we're still going to license them, where are we at?
Well, actually, every year we do a zoning review. They ask for verification, and we do allow them as a facility to operate there under the auspices of what they were originally approved for. So, let's see. I'll give you the last one.
And that's why I asked the question, because now if all of a sudden something comes up that says what they were actually allowed to be there for now is not there, where are we at with the state that licensed them?
So they're designated for use as a children's home, and it's approved in the general plan for the PUD. And we always say this, to the best of our knowledge, the placement of all the buildings within the project conforms to the plan, and the construction of improvements then and subsequently have been completed according to the final development plan and the zoning codes of the city. They had asked for, just recently in February, an approval for a part of their treatment facility called the Phoenix School that I had never heard of. But according to Lori Billington, that school has been part of the treatment center since 2004. And so as far as I am concerned, it is an approved use within that home, within that treatment facility. And so that was our last approval to them.
Okay. Thank you, Terry. Could we now have the people from Southern Peaks come up? And if you'd like, are there all three? If all three come up, we have 3 chairs here, and or just one.
I'm all sit down.
I think yeah. Please sit down there and.
Thanks.
None of them.
How's everyone?
Doing good.
Doing good, thank you.
We'd just like to have your names and what position you have with the.
My name is Brandon Miller. Thank you for having us. I'm the facility director at Southern Peaks Regional Treatment Center.
Did you say Brandon or Brent?
Brandon Miller.
Brandon.
Lori Billington, she can introduce herself.
Lori Billington, I'm the administration director at Southern Peaks.
Good afternoon, I'm Christian Hendrickson. I'm counsel to Southern Peaks. I'm with the firm of Sherman and Howard.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Appreciate it. Okay. You've heard the discussion and what we've had here. Would you like to start off explaining maybe your facility and what you've got going there?
Absolutely. Like I said, my name is Brandon Miller. I'm sorry, I'm not used to speaking in a microphone. I'm the facility director at Southern Peaks. I began as the facility director in 2014, June of 2014. So I've been there coming on 3 years. I wanted to give some context around what we've gone through and some of the transitions to address this perceived issue of AWOLs at our facility. In 2014, one of the things that I believe in very much is community partnership. I felt that at that time that Southern Peaks could do more with community partnership. I believe in the impact when things go wrong at Southern Peaks and how that can affect the community. As a result, we started getting back into the community, everywhere from being participants in different activities, banquets, partnering with the police department to address some of our concerns, partnering with the Department of Human Services. And we've worked on that plan, not only residential, but also adding in community-based services that were directly needed through the community, such as getting certified in FFT, which is family functional therapy that is directly related to the community-based world. We've opened up community-based services such as in-home services to preventative measures directly into the community. So I'm a big believer in community partnerships. But in 2014, I also believe in trauma-informed care. By trade, I'm a therapist, and I very much believe in treatment, and I believe that kids need a safe environment to do treatment. And as a result, I brought in the Sanctuary model, which is a research-based trauma-informed care model that's nationally recognized. This model preaches commitments to provide a safe and secure environment for the facility. The first prescribed commitment is nonviolence, all right? And we've worked, it's a 3-year commitment process to become a sanctuary certified facility. And in this summer, we will be seeking our certification. Over the 3 years, and you heard Mr. Clifton discuss it. Over the 3 years, we've aggressively worked to reduce the violence at our facility. But along with that is the safety of absconding. I call it absconding because I include when even a kid walks out of his dormitory, not just even when they walk off the facility, and eradicating that across the facility. Many of these problems that Southern Peaks can face are often created, these barriers, by what we are defined and how we are regulated. We are regulated, and I think somebody from the community asked the question, why can the police versus us do certain things? We are regulated by the Volume 7 regulations by the Department of Human Services in the state. The Volume 7 regulations do not apply to the police. Those regulations allow us certain freedoms and restrict us to certain things as well. One of them is that no RCCF, residential child care facility, which we are licensed under, is allowed to lock their egress, their exit doors. Okay, we cannot do that under the Volume 7 regulations. The other thing is that the state of Colorado does not deem absconding or AWOLs as a safety issue. All right, we are allowed to physically manage kids after exhausting all positive corrections and verbal de-escalation techniques when a kid is committing a safety issue. They will not concede to the fact that AWOLs are a safety issue. So we have to be present for that safety issue during an AWOL if they decide to commit a safety issue beyond the fact of the AWOL before we can physically manage those behaviors. It makes it difficult. Really makes it difficult from the kids we serve and the reality of the clients we serve. I do think that there's some misconception about what types of kids we take and where they're from and who they are. We are licensed by the Department of Human Services to take kids from ages 10 to up to 21. However, we do not, in order for it to be over the 18 mark, they have to be placed with us prior to their 18th birthday. So we wouldn't just go and take a 19-year-old or a 20-year-old as a result to that. Those kids are primarily from, right now, we have about 102 kids here at the facility at any given day, and about 85 of them are from Colorado, to include Fremont County, but all across from Colorado.
Repeat those numbers, please.
About 85. It fluctuates day to day, depending on emissions and discharges, etc. But we've been averaging about 85.
How many from Colorado?
About 85. Average.
102.
Oh, 102 total.
How many from Fremont County?
I don't know off the top of my head. I think it's 3 right now. And again, those fluctuate. One of the things that I identified in 2014 that we have transitioned out of, and I heard some concerns here about, was the division between Department of Youth Corrections and Department of Human Services. Okay, as a therapist, as a person who believes in treatment, I completely agree with those concerns. We've identified those. I identified that very early on, and we have reduced who we take from the Department of Youth Corrections to where we do not take a handful of kids, a couple, at any given time. And these are kids that have been deemed by the court that are for our level of care and probably shouldn't be in detention centers with those kids. Back before I took over, we had double digits, 15, 20, 25 of Department of Youth Corrections. We are 98% Department of Human Services. We do not deal with the Department of Youth Corrections that much. And like I said, when they are deemed by the court to be appropriate for our level, which I would say is also all our kids, that they are, deemed by the court to be appropriate for our level of care. I don't pretend to act like a detention center. We are not a detention center, and we pride ourselves on being a treatment center. And when kids demonstrate things that do not act in our accordance to what we believe in, we will remove them from the facility much quicker than years past. Okay, most of our kids are kids that are. Actually, I would say primarily all our kids are kids that are victims. They have been victims. That doesn't mean they do not have offenses to their name. that they've committed. But as you know, many of you might know, without treatment, and that victims often turn to the behaviors that have been presented on them. And when we talk about the sex offender unit, I heard that brought up many times, okay? These kids are primarily, if not all, actually, I would say all, have been victims, and they might have committed an offense that has, repeated the behavior they saw, but they are victims to start out. The other thing is, I also believe, based on our sanctuary model, that, again, the type of facility we are is residential facility. One of the things that I added to the facility was a utilization manager, a licensed clinical therapist that screens all kids that come into our facility. We've never had that before, and we look for kids that aren't victims, that are prone to violence, and we do not allow them into our facility. Now, one of the questions may be, well, then why does violence occur? Well, if anyone has been through treatment before, we understand that when you start challenging treatment to things that kids have dealt with, or even adults that have dealt with, it often triggers responses. And I believe one of the people that talked before were discussed about often one of those responses is a flight response, but it also can be a fight response as well. They're usually emotional reactions to something that they cannot handle and overwhelm. That is part of the therapeutic process, and we are very successful in dealing with the therapeutic process. However, there are times that they're beyond our reach, just as in any situation when you're dealing with treatment. And we work our best to ensure the safety and transition that kid to a safe environment where they belong. I think some of the context as well around I believe the numbers that we've heard a lot of numbers. I think a lot to do with definitions and recidivism, as well. And you can explain recidivism in 5 different ways. It's based on the definition, around. One of the things that we did early on was become very transparent and push transparency and be collaborative, all right? And we focused on, with the police department, because it was an understanding of the community resources that potentially we were utilizing, in collaborating with them on making sure that we didn't take away from the community as much as we could. And if we need to adjust that and change that, we're willing to do that. But that has been a focus of ours, and investing in that. We wanted to make sure that we provided, we took care of our own in regards to our problems or perceived problems. As a result, I think it also benefits the community, because this was an added resource that is there that would not be there before if was an issue to happen, that officer could respond to whatever that issue out into the community. And like I said, we're willing to look at that. I heard suggestions out there. We want a very collaborative approach to this. I also feel that when we talk about police context, there's a lot of new procedures and protocols that were in place, that are put in place, that also may reflect on that number being inflated versus where we were before in some of those numbers. For example, part of our efforts to collaborate with Department of Human Services, as well as the police department by the chief of police, or the predecessor, was, for example, anytime there's an allegation, kid on kid, staff on kid, kid on staff, whatever it is, most residential facilities call the Department of Human Services and reports that, and they govern that. Well, currently now, because the chief and the police department wanted to be informed at a quicker pace, which I'm fine with, that transparency. We notified the Department of Human Services. They will notify the PD, and the PD will also come out along with the Department of Human Services to investigate or look into whatever that situation is. That is very uncommon for residentials. I'm on the board of CAFCA, the Colorado Association for Children, and I don't have all the numbers, but some of the issues, I don't think that's that's foreign to them, along with some of our innovative ideas and collaborative ideas from runaways and AWOLs across the state. Most residential facilities are in residential areas, and whether you're looking at Denver's and El Paso counties, and I can tell you that they deal with it on a significant basis, and that forums like this are not uncommon amongst the state of Colorado, where residential facilities have to explain the barriers that are put in front of them around the AWOLs. And I know that we are also looked on as one of the preferred providers now in the state of Colorado, with our monitor stating, I think, was it last time she came out, we're a preferred provider, okay, across the facility. Again, without getting into other facilities and the details around facility, Southern Peaks represents. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I just have a couple of questions for you. Out of the 102 that you have right now, how many are court mandated?
I believe, I guess what do you define court mandated? I mean, I believe they're all approved through court.
Yeah. They're not they're not neglected or abused children. They were placed there by the courts.
I believe. Yeah, go ahead. Lori's going to answer that.
So it depends on how we get kids referred to us. If kids are referred to us through probation or through the Department of Youth Corrections, is that specifically what you're asking, is Department of Youth Corrections?
I'm asking how many children there have gone through the court system not being abandoned or abused by a parent.
So if you look
How many
at
are out there?
if you look at truly probation kids that are sent for that particular reason, all kids have to have a court order to be in residential care. So I mean, it's a little bit of a skewed question depending upon the intent behind it, and that's why I was asking for clarification. So in order for kids to go to residential, there has to be a court order to go to residential. For kids that are court ordered to treatment from the judicial side or the probation side, strictly through Colorado, I think right now we're at 6 Division of Youth Correction kids today.
Yeah.
And a couple of our out-of-state kids. So I think, and I'm going off the top of my head a little bit here. I mean, I could look it up for you and count through. But kids that are strictly placed by probation outside of the 6 that are Division of Youth Corrections, I would guess we're looking at maybe 12 additional kids that are placed strictly through probation.
So total, how many would be problem children from a conviction of a juvenile crime?
Again, that's going to be a skewed number because a lot of the kids that are placed by the Department of Human Services also have probation involvement because they've committed a crime. So to answer that just straight up with a number, I'm not able to give you that answer, and I'm not trying to be difficult. It's a difficult question to kind of ferret out.
I think the DA started to touch upon it, where it starts with the funding, and everything's driven by the Department of Human Services and that funding. So there's no placement money for kids that have committed crimes or like on the probation side. So everything funnels through the Department of Human Services. So whether they have a probation officer or not, or they're just straight dependency and neglect cases, they all go through the same system and referred by the same caseworker.
So these kids that are abused or neglected, that have been beat up by daddy, and they're sent to you instead of to a foster home?
Mm-hmm.
They're sent to you because they're so messed up they need treatment?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, so,
And it's usually because they're unsuccessful at lower levels of care. Very rarely does a child get placed through the Department of Human Services that hasn't already exhausted other possible options of lower levels of care. We're considered a higher level of care in the state of Colorado. So foster care, group homes, kinship homes would have been explored first typically prior to a child being
okay, how are
referred
these
to us.
children housed? Do you put a 6-year-old with an 18-year-old that
No,
have
we
both
keep
had
age.
problems?
We keep age and gender, obviously, and treatment need as our primary housing.
Like people, like
Right.
individuals?
So our offense-specific kids are all housed together, and then they're split up by ages, so you don't have a 17-year-old rooming with, near a 13-year-old. We keep the girls' unit is separated, and then all the other kids are separated as much as possible by treatment need.
Okay, being this is a treatment center, I understand you don't want it to look like, well, CSP doesn't even look like a prison anymore. Why isn't there some type of fencing or restraint? Because we have citizens around here, and that's my concern. You have all these runaways, and they have even come as close as my business downtown.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the concern here, is you're saying, oh, there goes one, and then you wait until he's across the parking lot and call the police, and it's like no big deal. But to me, it's a big deal when they have to close down the library because they've got 3 of your kids in the basement. And I'm sure it's a big deal to all these residents when they can't go outside because they're afraid of them. So why can we not put some type of a restraint? Doesn't have to be razor wire around the top, but something that's going to take a little more than 3 minutes to hoist their rear ends over. I'm not understanding why we can't do that. My stepson was in a treatment center. They had a fence. You had to call with a buzzer to go in to visit.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't that they were all criminals in there. It was a treatment facility in the middle of Springfield, Missouri. And I'm not understanding with so many runaways why we can't do that here.
Again, the Volume 7 regulations prevent us to do certain things.
And those are state
They
regulations?
are state
Oh,
regulations.
good.
It's under the residential child care facility license. But just to be clear, we do have a fence, and we're locked to get in, but we aren't allowed to be locked to get out. So we do have a push-button call to come in and do visitation. Everything around the fence, there's only 2 exits in our fence, and both of those are secured with a pin, so it does take them some time to be able to take the pin out, to be able to get out the door. It's not locked, but it is restricted, which has thus far been able to be approved through the regulations. Additionally, our protocols are in place that we have staff that follow the kids. We have a staff that is on duty inside the perimeter of the fence that try and intercept the kids, talk with them, try and prevent them from leaving. And even though we do call the police when they step foot off our grounds, that doesn't stop our staff from still continuing to pursue the kids and try and get them to come back.
And I think, adding on that, one of the points of clarification out of this, I heard from November, the 72, AWOLs from runaways. How many, was us calling them in the new protocols rather than where it was previously, where we'd wait until we lost sight of kids and we were unsuccessful in gaining them. And that's how it used to operate before 2014, was that we'd wait before we lost sight to them, and then we would call as the police officer communicated to you guys. And now we're calling right away. And
The officers that we have out there on the off-duty officers, you don't have an off-duty officer out there 24/7, correct?
No.
What are the times that your off-duty officers out there?
We identified early on that our peak and most vulnerable hours were from 8 to midnight, obviously because of the nighttime, and that's where we put the officers, the officer slots. And like I said, if that is something we would like to adjust, I'm open to those solutions and collaborating on when the best peak times to adjust that. We've thought about randomizing it, increasing hours. We're more than willing, to look at those options.
I have one question.
Yes.
Go ahead. Is there any way we can keep the kiddos in school?
No.
That's all we're trying to do. Keep the kiddos in school. I mean, the treatment centers, I think, are a wonderful thing. I know that you've done a good job, and you've got a job that, quite frankly, there's not a lot of people in here that would want. Is there a possible way to keep these kids in school?
What do you mean, like
Keep
in
them
our school?
on the property.
Yeah, we have a facility approved school through the department.
Okay, we have 72 runaways since November.
Mhm.
Okay, or AWOLs. Is there any way to keep those 72 kids there? Because my concern is not only we have people who live in the area
Mhm.
that are experiencing things that they shouldn't with property ownership.
Yeah.
And then we have an 11-year-old that goes out at 8 o'clock at night. I know when my kids were 11, they couldn't go out the front door at 8 o'clock at night without being stopped.
Mhm.
I mean, unless they went out through the window, then I caught them on the way back in. But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is there a possible way to keep these kiddos in school? That's what the whole thing boils down to here.
Well, we need to work on solutions and notification. That's what I hear. Let's start that. Solutions. What do you
Solution.
think those solutions are? And the concern from the citizens was notification. Do you think that could be done, whether it's a block captain or something, be notified that you have someone that has walked away?
Yeah, yes, we're willing to look into all those. I guess it would be how it's set up, and we'd have to, talk about the details of where the notification is, how the notification, when the notification is, occurring. Is it lost sight? Is it completely? I mean, so we would definitely have to, sit with, and we're more than willing to have those collaborative meetings. If we can even have it at our facility, more than welcome with the community members and anybody that wants to attend, and we can discuss the details and how to solve notification.
Okay. Rick, would you come back to the microphone again, please? You seem to be the dominant member here. What?
The spokesperson.
What do you think about a notification system? If we could come up with one to notify someone along, especially along 4 Mile Lane, seems to be that's the first barrier they go to. I don't hear them going east of Penrose. Is that a possibility? Could we form a group of individuals that would meet periodically to have a central phone number that we could, or 2 phone numbers that they could call and say, hey, look, we do have someone that did walk away? Because that seems to be your concern.
It is, but I'm not sure that burden should be on us.
I agree.
So if you talk about 2 phone numbers, so they call me and one of the girls, then is it our responsibility to notify the rest of the neighbors? I don't think so.
Well, good point. How do you?
And not only 4 Mile Lane, but Dakota Heights. I mean, I understand there's been walkaways in Dakota Heights, the library. I don't know about Florence because we've got some good barriers between there and Florence, but does that answer your question?
Well,
sort of.
I didn't take it.
Go ahead.
I don't want to
toss something in here. I mean, I don't know exactly where the reverse 911 starts. I mean, I have a daughter in high school, and it gets actually kind of annoying, but I get quite a few calls from the high school. I get them on my cell phone, I get them on my work phone, I get them on my home phone. So I get the same call 3 times, but it's in essence a reverse 911 call telling me if there's a fire drill at the school or there's a lockdown or whatever the heck is going on that's out of the ordinary at the high school. And Chief Cooper, do those originate through the police department, or is that a sheriff's department activity, or is the high school itself? I mean, it seems like the reverse 911 or whatever you would call it in this situation would be at least an immediate address to the problem that they're having.
The reverse 911 system is generally used by law enforcement, so the police department or the sheriff's department or the state patrol can call for one. It has to go through FreeCom, the communications center, because they have all of the technology to make that happen. I have used that system in the past. I try to use it as little as possible because other than parking, it generates the most citizen complaints.
Now, I can believe that. Are you familiar with the high school system?
Yes,
And
I am.
Do they own their own system?
Yes, they do.
Okay. So, at least in principle, Southern Peaks could have I guess it's an auto
Yeah.
dialer of some sort.
And so
Yeah.
and
Okay.
we can absolutely look into that. I have kids as well, so I get the same calls that
Yeah.
you guys get. And
As a resident, though, would you be prepared to receive an average of 19.6 text notifications?
well, I don't think all 19.6 are runaways. I think he was talking police services, and again, I think those. And correct me if I'm wrong.
Juvenile runaway, 72 since November 1.
I think those are the calls that get made to the PD, even if we still have eyes on the kid and bring the kid back to the facility. So
Okay,
those
thank you.
aren't
Okay,
all
that
true
clarifies.
AWOLs. So I guess my suggestion would be that if we lose sight of a kid and we don't actually have sight on them and staff with them, then we would make the notifications, which would cut down those probably by about 80%, 80 to 90%, because most of the time we keep eyes on or the PD picks them up in a matter of minutes.
And that's where
It's-
we're
and they get
averaging.
returned.
We're averaging about single digits with that per month on kids we lose sight of, and that's where our numbers are from the AWOLs purposes.
Yeah, I guess what I'd like to see is Southern Peaks make a commitment to at least look into the software.
Absolutely.
And that seems like that would certainly address the immediate issue.
How far past the parking lot do you lose sight?
Depends on
What's
on the
Are
area.
they at these girls' houses by the time
No,
you lose sight?
we'll keep them going through the housing development. Oftentimes, sometimes to be honest, with you, if we lose sight, it would be because the kid's faster than a lot of us.
I'm just saying, if they're out mowing their yard or doing something with their kids, by the time you lose sight, is it in their front yard? Or is it back in Dr. Lay's yard? Or is it in Rick's yard? Or where is it that you're?
It just depends. It depends how quickly
Because
they.
I think it needs to be something so they're alerted
Yeah.
at the same time you know the kid's gone.
Okay.
We can take a look at those specifics.
Yeah.
Ms.
Yeah.
Smith?
Did you receive the list of suggested solutions from the police department?
Probably not.
Their list. They made a couple of possible recommendations.
Okay.
They mentioned that you could expand your contract for off-duty with the police department to include time slots during business hours. That would be a direct expense to you.
Mhm.
Or Southern Peaks could reinforce any areas of their existing fencing that have eroded away or otherwise become non-secure.
We don't.
Is there any way that the fencing could be made more secure? Or
It's pretty secure. It's supposed to be an unclimbable fence. The problem is you have some athletic kids that can hop 8 feet. That's rare. It's a few, but there are some kids that are pretty athletic and can do that.
I just finish the list and see
Yep.
what your response would be. Research legal avenues and what are the limits and restrictions that are placed on the facility when dealing with non-compliant youth and the possibility of holding the facility responsible. And then working with all the stakeholders involved to effectively deal with repeat runaways and problem youth.
Do you have we need to supply them with a copy of this
Yeah.
from Chief Cooper. Can we do that? Oh, wait, that's mine. No, go ahead.
That was mine. He can have
Was.
mine.
Okay.
And if I come up, we're good.
So that's, the mayor doesn't get the vote, doesn't get a piece of paper, great. Okay, yes. Terry, Ms. Bernath, go ahead.
I would like to know, your facility has grown and changed over time, and I wanted to know, are there any new or expanded programs that you have instituted that might answer for increased runaways over time?
Absolutely. As a therapist, I believe in evidence-based programming very much. I've adopted the sanctuary model, which is a research-supported model, trauma-informed model, we've also adopted the ART, which is aggression replacement training that we are actually putting in this year. Is also an evidence-based model that we've adopted. Girls Circle for the girls programs. We have also invested in evidence-based interventions such as EMDR, such as biofeedback. CBT, trauma-focused CBT, DBT, a range of different clinical models. FFT, like I said, for community-based programming. So we have invested in the past year and a half, 2 years, a lot of time and money into these programs. Unfortunately, like any other evidence-based program, they're evidence-based because they're complicated and take a lot of time to invest and get moving forward. So most of these programs take a year or 2 to 3 years to implement into the culture of any facility. And that's what we're doing, and we will continue to, I believe, benefit from the results of those programs.
The other piece of that is most of those curriculums are built on skill building for kids to be able to better cope with their emotions, so that fight or flight isn't their first response, but instead they start to regulate their emotions and their responses and become more able to handle the triggers that are presented either within the facility or within treatment or within family therapy, or, you know, they get their court call and they're ticked because the judge tells them they have 3 more months to prove what they need to do. You know, some kids immediately jump up and run out the door. These different curriculums that we're putting in place, these different treatment modalities are put in place to help the kids build skills so that isn't their first response. So those are the different things that we've put in place, as well as expanding the number of therapists that we have at the facility in order to work with the kids to teach them those skills and give them opportunities to practice those skills.
We've reduced caseloads in the last 3 years from where they were averaging before 2014 to 14 to 15 kids per caseload to where they're under 8 kids per caseload. We've doubled the clinical department, but we believe in very much in investing in staff members. We are aggressively pushing to be cutting edge and challenging both economically and from a cultural standpoint to improve our staffing base. As a result, we have doubled our therapists. We have added educational staff, educational director that we never had before, utilization manager, and we financially invested in our staffing, our frontline staff. Where just recently we invested over $1 raise for every single staff, operational staff in the facility. We employ about 100 staff from Fremont County alone, and somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 from Canyon City directly, out of a 150 staff facility. And we really work to try to make it an environment that people want to come to work.
Okay. Mr. Krause, did you have a comment? Then we need to start trying to wrap this up.
Solutions, you guys say that your licensure or your permitting won't allow you to detain your clients. Is there an opportunity to get reclassified or licensed so that you could?
Unfortunately, unless we became a detention center, we could not.
And so your facility would have to dramatically change in order to detain?
And the type of kid that we'd be taking,
You'd be open to.
It wouldn't be a treatment center, it would be a detention center.
Okay, so that's not an option.
Other than getting the state of Colorado to change their regulations, which would, I think, make us all happy, but.
Okay. I was just on your website looking, just kind of trying to learn a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
How many of your clients are, and this is just a random question, but I'm just curious, currently, how many of them have been commercially, sexually exploited?
We have one unit for females who have been exploited, but not necessarily all commercially, but and that one unit holds about 16 kids.
Okay. Maybe this is a question for the attorneys in the House. you know, hopefully nothing bad ever does happen with one of your kids escaping. But if it does, where does the liability fall? I mean, are you all indemnified from any problem? Nobody's really asked that question.
I'm going to refer that to our legal counsel.
I'm going to let the city attorney take. The city is immune. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't try to problem solve, but the city is generally immune from liability of this type of liability. Having said that, I mean, I'd be curious as to whether the facility itself, if there are certain offenders that if they continue to be AWOL, can you decide not to take them?
Yes.
Do you?
Yes, and we do.
How many times? I mean, I assume it's not a number, but is there a threshold where at some point you say, okay, this kid isn't appropriate for this facility?
Yes. Part of our sanctuary model, we do a yellow flag, red flag process, which when kids demonstrate either aggressive behaviors or absconding behaviors, that they will call the teams, our treatment teams would call a yellow flag or a red flag, depending on the circumstances, which would identify, you know, the first discussion amongst the team members, the clinical professionals in the room, on why this kid may be doing this and whether this kid needs to move. But based on that, there's, you know, kids that have a red flag, there's not too many ones after that, whether they'll be removed or not, if they're getting a red flag call treatment meeting.
Just to clarify, then we work with the external teams to find alternative placement for them
Yes.
outside of our facilities. So we make the request. Kids that have probation or legal involvement, the process is typically a little bit faster because they can do a probation revocation. Kids that are within the Department of Human Services and Social Service placements only, they're more difficult to find alternative placements for. And so it tends to be a longer process. But with any of those kids, we have the option of having them removed from our facility because they aren't functioning or aren't abiding by the rules and the regulations set forth for our facility, and then they're jeopardizing the treatment for other kids and/or their own safety or other people's safety. If that helps clarify that.
Yeah.
But just back to the liability, I'm stuck on it just a little bit. So if 10,000 acres would have burned down, God forbid, or one of our barns would have burned down, obviously our personal property, we would have an issue. We would file that claim with our insurance company, and then our insurance, everybody's fair game, right? I mean, they're coming after you, they're coming after anybody. But I don't know how much was expended, how many man hours with the fire department. You know, there were a lot of people on 4 Mile Lane the other day, police, fire department. That's taxpayer expense.
We are a business that pays taxes. We're not a
nonprofit. Yeah.
So.
But I mean, has the city or the county discussed those types of impacts and the liability of that for our citizens? Just.
I haven't, but we could. Sure.
Thank you.
I would be interested, Corey, do you have more to add to this discussion that we're having today?
I admittedly know enough to be dangerous, but I would be concerned about the kind of the mechanisms in place to assure that if we have repeat offenders, you know, recidivism, it seems to me, I was talking briefly to the chief, that there are people that do this repeatedly. And that seems to me those are people that aren't appropriate for this facility. And my hunch is this facility has some discretion in terms of who it accepts and who it doesn't. And so those are the areas I would be most curious about in terms of making sure that the kids that are housed at this facility are appropriate for residential treatment.
Meisner?
Maybe we could wrap up. I think the things that I would like to see is there seems to be common acknowledgement that the notification is an issue. And I think that the primary notification should be responsibility of you. One, could we get a commitment that you're going to look at software or whatever options are available? Yep. And second, I mean, I see some information that says that not everybody wants to be notified within a community. Another option there may be to start accumulating a list of people in the 4 Mile, Dakota, or those areas that want to be on this notification list. So that if an individual leaves the property, those individuals that have elected to be on a list are automatically notified, and we've accomplished one huge step here. And then it appears you're trying to run a quality program. And as part of that quality program, you're trying to reduce the number of walkaways. And relative to what our attorney has said, the other thing we'd like to see is a reduction of the 72 offenders that you've had. It would be interesting to see how many individuals are involved in those 72. Are we talking about the old 80-20 rule, where that we've got 20% of your children that are accounting for that primary percentage of runaways? And what kind of protocols do you have in place for repeat offenders that are maybe not as conducive as they need to be for treatment in your facility? And if you can at least work on those three areas, a notification system, a notification list, and reduce repeat offenders, you've addressed some things from my standpoint.
Can I add some clarification real quick about the repeat offenders? As Ms. Billington said over here, part of our issue is the time getting the kid out, not necessarily the identification. So a lot of times that repeat offender will have a discharge termination on that kid already, and it's about the placement like of that kid and where, because there's not many residential facilities in the state of Colorado. So trying to get that kid out is difficult, and like Ms. Billington said, if they're on probation, it's a much quicker process, okay, because you can actually revoke their probation and get them, in detention. But when they're not, that becomes a very difficult process, and at times, and we can't abandon a kid. We'd be held liable just like any other entity that would abandon.
I think we all recognize that there's a variety of legal complications in determining that. It would also be interesting to see what your current threshold is in terms of what is a problem or a repeat offender.
Okay.
And if that's at 6, I think we need to reduce that to 3.
Okay.
In an effort from your part to indicate to the community that we're trying to address those specific problems. I mean,
Absolutely.
the difficult kids are not going to go away. We need to be part of the solution, but at the same point in time, we need to have a safe community.
I agree with you.
I'm curious, do you have any other suggestions of solutions to bring to the table in our discussions today?
As far as us, we were looking at some of the same things. We did hear about the notification system. We were definitely willing to look and commit to looking into those things in the best way to notify. We're definitely we can commit to gathering a list to notify those individuals. We are also, one of the suggestions that was already said here is that we are open to looking at increasing our police contract with off-duty and during business hours, et cetera, and making it more conducive to our needs right now. And as everybody knows, there's ebbs and flows of this situation, so we may, it's as simple as just adding different hot times that kids have picked up on and adding a different perspective to the police contract for us.
Okay.
So.
To set up another time, maybe as we
Yes, that's what I was
research
going to
this
do
out
next.
and see if we can
Thank you. I was going to do that
see how
next.
it goes there.
90 days or 1st of September? 1st of August or 1st of September? What's the pleasure, council? Quickly, or I'll decide.
I think what's best for you folks for implementation.
We need a plan, and then we need implementation.
Yeah.
And hopefully the city could assist with some information on
Sure.
property owners up there so that we could probably reach out and do kind of an opt-in.
Well, I think even the people that are involved can help with that, because I don't know that everybody in that area wants to be on that list.
Right.
Yes.
But I think that group also needs to try to help with the solution and saying, here, John Doe wants to be on, Mary Jane wants to be on. But I think just including everybody in the area, I don't know that that's an appropriate solution relative to notification.
But we can get you addresses where
I was
you
gonna
can
say, if we
notify
could get
them and ask.
addresses, we could
Yes,
send a letter
absolutely. You can work
and
with
then go
Terry
from
Bernath.
there.
Probably, is that right, Terry? Would you be the one?
Huh?
Terry Bernath would be the one to work with to get that list.
Okay, so are we going to say August 1st or September 1st?
August.
What? August 1st?
August.
So that will be the first, before the first council meeting in August, which would be the 5th?
We can come back in and see where everybody's at. What kind of progress we've
They're gonna
made
work?
with the intention of accomplishing some things. Okay.
That will be the 7th of August.
It doesn't matter.
We'll go at 4 o'clock, just like we did now, so we can get our stimulating council meeting done at 6.
Lori, are you going to be my point of contact?
Certainly can be.
Okay, cool.
Okay?
Okay. I would just like to thank everybody that showed up for this thing, okay? There's the citizens, you folks from there, police department, DHS. Thank each and every one of you for participating in this
Called
to
over.
help work for a solution. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. We sure
Thanks, I
appreciate it.
appreciate it.
Okay, we need to go ahead and have a motion to call a special council meeting at 4 o'clock on August the 7th. Go ahead, motion, Mr. Meisner.
Mayor, council, I moved it. We have a special meeting
August 7th,
August 7th,
4 o'clock,
4 o'clock.
to interface and meet with concerned citizens and the Southern Peaks Center.
With that said.
Second.
Made and second?
It would be the first Monday in August.
That's our first meeting, August. All in favor? Would you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Meisner?
Aye.
Councilmember Jaquez?
Aye.
Councilmember Weed?
Aye.
Councilmember Gill?
Aye.
Councilmember Schumacher?
Aye.
Councilmember Smith?
Aye.
Approved by unanimous vote.
So we are adjourned.